Paul Knowles. Before going any further, I'd like to set the record straight on my nickname. No, I am not the mayor of Northeast Portland. You see, Roy J. of the African American Chamber, he's the one who started calling me that. Then pretty soon the newspapers had it, and then television had it. And now you go on Google and type my name in, and it'll pop up. So I guess I'll be your mayor, because you didn't vote me in and you can't vote me out. I'm very fortunate to have received the love I have from the people of Northeast Portland. I think it all began when I started the Cotton Club in Jumptown. Now, you see, we called it Jumptown because it was always something to do. It was always busy, moving, and jumping. We had our own communities of jazz clubs, barbershops, restaurants, beauty salons, and a fashion scene that was out of this world. But before I moved to Portland, I was stationed in Spokane for the Air Force. I had about 4 jobs at the time. I worked all day, every day. From 8 to 5, I was repairing typewriters. From 6:30 to 10, I was working at the hotel. I was teaching skiing on the weekends, and then I was doing janitorial work on the side. All those jobs afforded me the opportunity to be able to purchase the Cot Club. And then that same club would gain its notoriety by attracting various celebrities and by becoming a symbol of Jumptown's 24/7 jazz reputation. And then, on any given night, you look up and you might see Sammy Davis Jr. Whether I'm right or whether I'm wrong, whether I find a place in this world or never belong, I gotta be me, I've gotta be me. What else can I be but what I am? People love Jumptown. They love the Cotton Club because it was nice. No violence or nothing like that. Just a good atmosphere. Oh, but there was so much more to me than the nightlife. You see, my wife Geneva, she had her own special vision of helping the community through hair care. She spent nearly 3 decades of her life perfecting her craft and building up relationships in the community. And then after that, we purchased the Geneva Sheer Perfection Barber and Beauty Salon. Now, Geneva was the backbone, really. I was one fixing, cleaning, and mopping. She did all the hard work, and the shop still stands to this day. But as for the Cotton Club, it's just an eyesore gray warehouse. The culture was Williams and Russell. That's where all the black people were. You could find the blacks there any time of day, any time of night. On Sundays, they leave church and they head on down to Sally's Chinese restaurant or the Texas Playhouse. That's where it was. That's where everybody wanted to meet. If you wanted to meet someone, you just go on down to Williams and Russell.
I capped off my 39th year as a union electrician, being honored for a lifetime of advancing equity and building up organized labor. It was a culmination of years I dedicated to my trade and the commitment I made to building relationships. But it wasn't always like this for me. My parents purchased our home on 7th and Shaver in 1953. We were the first black family to move into the neighborhood. It was an old German neighborhood where the neighbors would pull down their blinds whenever we came by, but one family was kind. Joe Dodge and his family came over and brought goodies to our door. Our families became good friends. A few years after I started school, there was a group of people who came to talk to my parents about busing us to a different school so my brother and I could get a better education. And when I went out to the other school, I had a friend who, if there were after school activities, I stay at her house. I remember going to the YWCA in downtown Portland to go swimming with my friend and her grandmother. I had to be about 11 or so, and I was denied access. The lady at the counter said I couldn't come in, but my friend's grandmother said she's with us. The grandmother was adamant that I was going to swim, and I did. I always had these folks, who would stand up and support me. One day, I asked, no, begged my mother to please let me wear my new Easter outfit to school. I promised her I would take perfect care of it. Mother agreed, and I was so happy. I was so cute. It was this bluish green knit button up. I made it through the entire school day without getting it dirty. I board the bus, sit in my seat, all the while the white kids are harassing us as usual, rocking the bus, calling us names like nigger and telling us don't come back here. But this time, a raw egg comes through the window, hits me on my chest, and gets all over my Easter dress. I was so upset, and so was my brother. A fight broke out. The bus driver left the kids who were fighting. I was terrified. When my father came home from work, he asked where my brother was, and I said I didn't know. And I wasn't sure we ever see him again. That's how terrified I was. When my brother finally returned home, he assured me we wouldn't have that problem again. So, I'm getting ready to graduate from elementary, and I tell my mother I want to go back to Highlandwood, my neighborhood school. My mother is brilliant, and so brilliant she was. And my parents were very involved when it came to our education. My mother said, why don't you go to summer school, and if you do well, we'll put you in that school for the next year. There were some things no one prepared me for. The teacher announced a math challenge. I rushed up to the board and completed the challenge. No one told me I should miss one or two and go sit down. Or if there's a spelling word, I should misspell some of those words and sit down. I didn't know that because at the white school, it was really competitive and you see who could stay at the board the longest. Well, afterwards, I went to play with the other kids and they started pulling my hair and fighting, saying, oh, she's so smart. I was just doing what I knew to do. We fought with our hands, not guns, but I still didn't like to fight. I didn't have a lot of friends, so at the end of the summer, I told my mother to send my black ass back out with them white kids. There was no way in hell I was going to go up in there and get beat up every day. I didn't fit in with the white kids. I didn't fit in with the black kids. Well, everything was normal. My brother went to Benson, then Jefferson. Just about everyone in our family went to Jefferson. When I got ready to graduate from 8th grade, my brother sat me down and said, I don't think you should come to Jefferson. I don't think you're going to fit in. You may do better at Grant. Well, the boundaries had just changed, and the side we lived on was the Grant School District side, so I went to Grant. There was a rule: you didn't cut up or show out at school. It was normal for my father to show up during the day, look through the classroom window to check on us, then leave. Well, I mirrored that with my child and my niece, who I took care of for a while. My dad wasn't afforded an education because he had to work, but my dad said we were going to get an education. I took it out of bullshit as being educated. There was a quality of life that was afforded to me growing up, and I wanted to maintain that way of life. I went to the University of Oregon 2 years, then to Portland State. Afterward, I went to the employment office, and they had an electrical apprenticeship open up. There were 2 openings, one for a machinist and the other for an electrician. I used to go to work with my father when I was younger. He used to be a machinist, and he told me I could be whatever I wanted to be except a machinist. So when I saw my options that day at the employment office, I knew I didn't want to be a machinist. Well, the office referred me to the Urban League. The Urban League prepared me for the interview, and they asked me about my qualifications. My father also taught me how to sew and work on cars. One of the things I told them was I had the same skills needed to read blueprints because I could read sewing patterns. I told them that. The first time I was set up as a foreman building pipelines in Alaska, the superintendent wanted me to be the foreman. I said, the white men are not going to work for me. But he said I was the most qualified. He said if they didn't like it, they could go through the proper chain of command and make their complaints or not work there. Well, they tried to set up a machine to shock me to death. Omar Shabazz brought it to my attention, and had it not been for him, I wouldn't be here today. He looked out for me. I always had men and women who saw the value in me. Yes, things happen, but I worked through it. Like when a white male colleague walked up to me and pinched my butt, I hit him and nearly knocked him off the 4th floor of the construction site. Or when the men were always looking at Playboy magazines at work. I asked if they could stop hanging the nude photos around, and they didn't, so I gave them a taste of their own medicine. I walked right in there with a Playgirl magazine, and the photos came down. Progress doesn't always come fast. Most times it happens slowly. But I learned to build relationships, and I have always taken pride in my trade. Bussin' helped me develop my resourcefulness and resolve. One of the best experiences I had was busing, but I lost a sense of community. It was good academically, but I think I almost lost me. Or I created a new me. Marnella Mosley. I'm an office manager at Courtesy Janitorial Services, one of the few black-owned businesses left on Alberta Street. I remember Mr. Floyd Booker's dream of renovating the building across the street, the Texan, and how the banks refused to give him a loan. Am I supposed to feel good? And I'm watching Mr. Booker, who I've known since I was a sophomore in high school, know that he had a dream and he could not make it happen for himself. As a young man coming out of the service, he wanted to be an architect. They told him no. So what he had to do, he went out and built a business so his sons would have a place to work. No one could say, you didn't take care of your sons. His sons run this business to this day because Mr. Booker laid that foundation. It's no different from any other family. Mr. Booker wanted the best for his family too. Ronald, Mr. Booker's son, has often been approached with 6-figure offers for the property. He gets handwritten notes, will pay cash, no questions asked. I get a little pissed and reluctant about people coming around here trying to interview black people for their personal gain. It's an intrusion, and they have no connection to the community. They have this grant that requires matching funds. A lot of these grants are given to new white establishments and not people of color. One of the board members for Alberta Street passed away, and they had a gathering. The new president discussed continuing her legacy. I wasn't there. I wrote him a letter telling him I didn't want to continue her legacy because her legacy included exclusion. I could see all these other businesses flourishing on Alberta Street, but she would hardly speak to us. I never received a response from him. And this is what keep the division going on. New people come in here and get all the perks in Mr. Booker's business. Been here 50 years and we taking care of this building with no outside assistant. We paint the building. That's us. I lived right here on 16th for the last 40 years, and I grew up on Alberta and Grand. People didn't really move in and move out back when I was coming up. We knew our neighbors and they knew us. My father and mother worked. We had to stay in the house until they came home. And when we were outside, we could go to the end of the corner not both corners. There were recreational things to do, mostly Mr. Softy. You see everybody from everywhere run after that. It's King Elementary now, but it used to be Highland Elementary. We go run around the playground there. I went to Highland until I was in the 4th grade. Then I was bused to another school. There were 5 family members who were bused. We didn't have a lot of luxuries back then. We were just a working class of people. There was a candy store on Union in Alberta. They made homemade candy and sold it for a nickel per bag. Boy, we loved that candy. It stood right next to the laundromat. There was a drugstore on Union, and my mother used to purchase soda and ice cream for a quarter. We made orange floats. There were landmarks in our area, and when you saw them, we knew we were home. One of my favorites was Elder Franklin's store. He owned a lot of businesses. He lived right on 9th in Alberta, where the store is now. They had all these plastic chickens. Horrible plastic chickens. But Elder Franklin was so very nice. He sold penny candies. He used to pass out candy to the neighborhood children. He'd also go out and get fresh fruit from local farmers. So he had candy and fresh fruit in his store. He sold barbecue. Oh, and he had this sauce. It was a sad day when Elder Franklin died. Another black business I remember sat where the tin shed is now. We called him Boss. He had his wife and girlfriend working in the store at the same time. Everybody knew it, and they knew it too. So it wasn't like no hidden stuff. Oh, they had the biggest German chocolate cake and the best seasoned fries. They were so good. Then there was Coast Janitoria, owned by the Scott family. Well, I went to school with one of the Scotts. They knew my parents. Everyone knew each other. It was a community within a community. One day, my sister decided she was going to get a ride home, and someone told my grandmother before we got home, and that was not a good thing. But that's how it was then. We looked out for one another. Mr. Booker bought that building from Aaron Mitchell, a black plumber. He charged Mr. Booker $58 a month. Mr. Mitchell told him, "The reason your rent is low is because I don't want you to fail." It was black men trying to help black men. I graduated from high school, spent 1 year at the University of Oregon, then started working. The job was so good I decided not to go back to school. Then I worked for the Private Industry Council, but everyone called it PIC. We created jobs for youth, but once that ended, there was an economic shift. Back then we had a sense of community. Then we got the gangs. Money was made illegally. Kids wanted that instant gratification. Selling crack, selling drugs gave it to them. And that sense of community was dying. There was no eyes on the streets. There were these uncouth vendors. They didn't care, and part of them was law enforcement. I had a son. He grew up in this neighborhood. He went to Vernon. Again, because we had community, I just didn't pay close enough attention. I moved 3 houses away from my dad. My parents divorced when I was 17. Anyway, my son was 16. His cousins lived in North Portland, and they joined the gangs on that side of town. The gang in our neighborhood told my son he should join up with them. Well, my son told him he wasn't joining with either side. Well, one day in 2003, an 18-year-old kid shot my son in the back of the head. I think it was because he needed to make a name for himself by killing a family member or someone from an opposite gang, but I really don't know. I only had one son. I could have moved, but I'm here, so I'm going to help as many people as I can, like the 85-year-old woman who comes to my house so I can help her read her mail so people don't take advantage of her. That's why I'm skeptical and offended at times. You have these people come in here and get everything, and the people who've been here still can't get anything. Then there are white people being rewarded for helping black people, but they're not really helping them. My father passed away in 2014 and his home stayed vacant for a year. I found myself in a position where I was ready to sell my childhood home my father originally bought for $17,500. Realtors and developers tried to buy our house for a little over $200,000, but later sold a house close to ours for over $700,000. Eventually, my sister and I sold the house for nearly $400,000. And unlike most, I was able to stay in the neighborhood. Intentionality matters. And if black people don't take care of each other, who will? You didn't ask whether they rented their house or owned their house. You just knew that was Miss Bly's house or Ronnie's house. You knew. There was just safety. Now you see the house so-and-so lived in, and it's just different. I only lived 3 houses away from my father was living, and now I don't know those people, but I know if I move out, I don't get to come back.
Sam Brooks. Some people say I have a special talent for seeing opportunity. In 1981, I started one of the first minority-owned staffing companies in Portland, Brooks Staffing. Then 6 years later, founded the Oregon Association of Minority Entrepreneurs. Even though we didn't see eye to eye on policy, the Ronald Reagan administration appointed me to the National Board for Small Businesses Development Centers in 1986, making me the first person of color to serve in the position. Here I was at 39 years old, the national chairman for small business in the United States. I was hot. Now, I'm still hot, but I'm old. I'm not the future. I have some ideas. I can tell people about things they're going through, but I'm not the future. I remember relocating from California to Oregon shortly after finishing my tour of duty in Vietnam and seeing the potential in the idea of the Alberta Arts District. In the late 60s and early 70s, the Alberta neighborhood was mostly populated by German and Scandinavian families. When black families started migrating into the neighborhood in large numbers due to the displacement caused by the building of the Interstate 5 freeway, the Memorial Coliseum, and Lloyd Center, German and Scandinavian-owned businesses lost interest in the community. Now, years later, neglect, indifference, and even hostility from the business owners who remained, as well as the city of Portland, led to an Alberta known mostly for drugs and crime. Some people avoided the neighborhood like a plague. No one wanted to be there, and the people who owned the property didn't want to be there. But that abandonment afforded me the opportunity to eventually purchase property to launch OAME. At the time, the building was owned by PDC, Portland Development Commission, now Prosper Portland and U.S. West Communications. It was full of open walls and concrete floors. From the outside, all people could see were the trucks and 7-foot-high gates that formed a secure perimeter around the entire property. I approached the PDC and made a proposal. I told the Latino guy who was head of economic development that this was a natural corridor. Every city you go to, there is something where you know of inclusiveness as the theme around it. If you go to New York, Chicago, they're all themes around inclusiveness. I began working on Project Alberta. My goal was to set up a trust for minority, women, and small businesses. The assessment process lasted from 1990 to 1991 and consisted of a study done in conjunction with the PDC. People who participated included students from the University of Oregon Architecture School and various representatives from the governor, from the mayor, and the county chair's office. Ultimately, the city and county approved of the trust, but the PDC, who was in charge of the development, did not. Nonetheless, I was able to secure $500,000 from the Federal Office of Community Development and launched the trust. Minorities, women, and small business didn't own very much. They still don't. And most of the time, when people get something developed, and this has happened many, many times, it gets taken away from them. Because what happened is, you get in and you don't know how to manage it. Somebody comes in, says people money helping you development, and they come in and buy it for a song from you, and you're gone. And they develop it. What we wanted to do was develop the property with lots of women, minority, and small businesses. But until it was actually paid off, it was owned by the trust. So if you got in and somebody wanted to buy you out for little or nothing because you got into some trouble trying to run your business, well, it wouldn't go to you. It goes back to the trust. The idea was to eventually grow those businesses along the Alberta corridor. I was successful in setting up the trust and correcting and predicting the potential of the Alberta Arts District. But I wasn't able to stop the wave of gentrification that evicted countless black families and shuttered the majority of black businesses that once populated Alberta. You play the hand you're dealt, not the one you like to have. The hand we've been dealt on Alberta is that the arts community saw the idea and said, yes, this is a great corridor. And they came in. And they started buying things. Well, I can't fault them. That's what we said. It is a great corridor. You should be doing it. Now they've done it, and we can't take that back. For me, I say it's about inspiring the next generation. I think I want the people to have hope. If you work hard enough on an issue, you can actually make it work. That's what Alberta means to me. You can get it done. It may not go your way. It may not go as fast as you want it to, but you can get it done. I'm pretty happy. I'm unhappy about what we wanted to do with the corridor. But maybe that was not the path. There are many paths to get to the same end. Maybe we're still on the path because it's going to be the next generation that makes this decision. Opportunities present themselves every day. It's up to you to be ready to take advantage of them. Jackson. Many of us, when we think of gymnastics, picture Simone Biles or Gabby Douglas. But the greatest gymnast I ever saw in person lived on 6th and Mason, the street I grew up on. I lived with my great grandparents on one end of the block. My mother's brother's house sat on the other. And we all had front row seats to witness the feats of Charles Kane. We'd be outside playing, and Charles would be doing backflips down the whole block. Like from where my brother's mother's house was to my house, which to me was like superhuman. That was years ago, but I take those experiences and wisdom I gained growing up on Alberta and share them with the world through my books, which have afforded me awards and accolades, but more importantly, the opportunities to speak at prisons and youth facilities both in the United States and abroad, pushing forward the discussion on black masculinity, family relationships, and the criminal justice system. The key to this has been authenticity. Basketball culture, the crack epidemic, and mass incarceration played defining roles in my life and the lives of many of my black peers. In a few short years, I went from the storied Jefferson High School basketball team and playing junior college basketball to petty drug dealing and eventually serving 16 months in prison. Where I grew up, this was common for many former athletes. Young black men who were fed an emphasis on sports stardom and little else were left searching for that prestige in all the wrong places after the glory days were over. But I couldn't let the traditional narratives reduce these people to their convictions, or more broadly, reduce Northeast Portland's black community to gangs and crime. These are stories you wouldn't hear about if led to the outsiders. For example, in the summer before fourth grade, I remember taking an encyclopedia to my grandparents brought, and I brought it door to door like a salesman, and convincing my friends that instead of playing outside and enjoying the sun, we should study for the upcoming school year. I remember the feeling of thinking I have power in this neighborhood, and I could talk to these guys who wanted to tumble and ride go-karts and play basketball for the whole day, all summer, to come into my house and read encyclopedias and study. To me, that's also part of a neighborhood. All of those guys remember me years later, and I still see them. We have this memory between us. But when I visit my old neighborhood, both the people and the sense of community I grew up with are long gone. As a storyteller, I made it my duty to ensure the stories aren't lost with them. Residents who are transplants here, they don't have the same history between them. They might be friends, but they don't have the legacy of friendship. To me, that's Northeast Portland. If you weren't doing flips down 6th Street and you didn't go to King School and spring off the springboard and you didn't know the lady who was peeking out the curtain and was snitched to your grandparents, you lived in a different kind of Portland. What I really try to do in my work is to make sure that Portland isn't lost. You see, I dedicated my literary life to making sure that Charles Kane, Elvis with the little arm, and Pooh Bear who lived across the street don't get lost in this new, shiny Portland with the new developments and the Kaiser Permanente. Yeah, that's nice, but so is not forgetting we existed.
I am direct. You'll know exactly where I stand. So, when people say they misunderstood me, I find that hard to understand. I was born in Vanport. There are a lot of varied memories of Vanport. I was too young to have any, only what I have been told. My mother told me she only got away with what she could fit in a stroller and was not permitted to return afterward to see if anything could be retrieved. When I was growing up, I thought Portland was the best place in the world, even though I could be walking down the street and a white person would stick their head out the car window and yell NIG or look at that pretty NIG. It was common, so common, I didn't pay attention to it. It was the accepted norm. I grew up in Southeast Portland. I graduated from Cleveland High School. My graduating class of over 500 students only had 7 blacks and 1 Cuban who was not considered black. I have no fond memories of high school. Teachers expressed and showed biases toward me. When I won the National Gold Key Award for fashion design, I was not told until after the special assembly, and I wasn't invited to attend. The next day, I was given the National Gold Key pin in a box by my art teacher. My mother was not involved in my education and did not talk to me about college. I was expected to get married, have children, but I wanted to be a fashion designer and planned my life accordingly. I worked and saved for 3 years, was accepted by a college in California, and from there I planned to attend Pratt School of Design in New York. When it came time to go to college, the balance of the money needed was not available. I got married and had children, became a stay-at-home wife. After 3 kids, I started doing dressmaking out of my home. Eventually, I went back to school for interior design. I had 4 sons when my husband and I divorced. The youngest was 18 months. I looked at my sons and thought I could no longer be the soft person, the mom who kissed the hurts, baked the cookies, and gave the hugs. I now had to become a drill sergeant. My sons were not going to become the boys raised by single mother statistics, incarcerated, killed, or on drugs. There was just no way that was going to happen. I remember being asked at a garden party what was my call to fame. I looked at them and said, raising 4 boys of color. I purchased a property on 14th in Alberta in 1992, a year after I moved back from California. The area had pretty much been abandoned by the city. There was no bus service after 9 p.m. The streets were not swept by the city. If a street light went out, you had to call repeatedly to get it fixed. After 6 p.m., the street was full of drugs, gangs, and prostitution. I got to know a lot of people on the street while working on my property. The black population is so low. I felt like the kids and prostitutes were from families we knew, and we couldn't talk about as if they were foreigners. There were also a lot of old service industries located on Alberta Street. Acme Glass, Coast Janitorial, Rex Walker Plumbing, and others. They kept their doors locked and gated during the day. If you wanted to go in, you had to be buzzed in. Now, when I got ready to rent my property, my requirements were no locked doors during business hours, no bars on the windows, hours needed to be posted, and they were to interact with the community. No one wanted to rent, so I opened a coffee shop. I thought that would be easy. I landscaped a garden on the next lot to the coffee shop because I wanted a place where people could come, meet, and socialize, a place in the community to call their own, owned and operated by a person of color. In 1996, I moved Shades of Color Art Gallery to Alberta Street. It was the only gallery in Oregon dedicated to works for artists of color. And when my mother became ill in 2000, I closed both the gallery and the coffee shop. I am proud of both venues. Art has always and will always be a part of my developments done in Portland. Now, although the plan for Alberta to be an inclusive arts-focused district started off well, I noticed things changing when realtors started seeing value in the area. A renovated house on 16th, which was originally purchased somewhere around $25,000, sold for $325,000. A realtor coined the area as the Alberta Arts District. Soon, the artists and people moving in were not of color. In many ways, the vision of using art as a vehicle for community building has been validated. I believe a solution will come back to building an inclusive community.
In the fall, I played football, but in the spring and summer, it was all about basketball. Aaron Catlin lived on 23rd and Deacon, and I lived on 13th and Deacon. The night before, we would plot about where we were going to play basketball. We would get a group of guys together and make our way to Alberta, Woodlawn, and Irving Park. We'd start at noon and wouldn't finish until the streetlights came up. Our whole day would be consumed with basketball. Man, that's where you learn how to toughen up. Wasn't no ref, you were your own ref. You had to speak up for yourself, call your own fouls. Many local legends were made on those courts. On our way home, me and Aaron would stop by a Safeway on MLK to buy some ice cream. We'd go home, sleep, and do it all over the next day. Before middle school, I played street ball with my family, but then I met Aaron, Damon, and other guys who were everyday hoopers. They inspired me to take basketball more seriously. Aaron and I would play one-on-one every day. Another part of our daily routine was going to my house and having my mom make chicken fried steak. Aaron loved my mama's chicken fried steak. Both of our moms' names are Shirley. Crazy, right? I don't take the changing times for granted. I coach an AAU team. It helps me to continue to create opportunities for young basketball players. When we were coming up, there was one AAU team. Everybody was trying to make it on this one team. It was tough, but it made us work hard. I made the team, and Aaron didn't. I always teased him about that. But by the time we hit high school, it didn't matter. Aaron went to Jeff, and I went to Wilson. You see, it surprised a lot of people because so many of my relatives attended Jeff throughout the years. But some of the guys I hooped with in middle school were going to Wilson, and I wanted to try something different. So I went with them. Back then, everyone who lived in the neighborhood went to the same school. Alberta is that neighborhood. It's like the main artery through the city. When you say Alberta, people know. People know Alberta Street. Jefferson and Alberta kind of go hand in hand. I kept telling Aaron he needed to come to Wilson with me. He finally transferred his sophomore year. The first day was cool. We talked to one another in the hall. The next day, we were sitting in class. Teacher called his name, and he didn't answer. He wasn't there. When I talked to him later that day, I was like, man, what happened? He said he couldn't do it. It was too white. And it was. It was a lot different from Jeff. He went to Wilson all of 2 days before going back to Jefferson. I was okay with that. We still talked every day. Now my father, he's an educated man. And he stressed getting an education. So attaining a degree was always plan A. Making it to the league was a dream I wanted, but it was my plan B. Once I realized that wasn't going to happen, I focused on graduating. And after I graduated, I was broke. I volunteered at DHS for a month, and I've been there 25 years, working with families and advocating for children. I also started coaching around the same time. I love what I do. I thought I might quit after my kids graduated, but I have grown kids now, and I'm still doing it. I've worked hard to help build the program at Jeff, and to know that there are kids who attend just so they can be a part of it, that's reassuring. But it's not all about ball. You see, the young guys who play for me have to keep their grades up. So if basketball doesn't work out for them, they have options. I really wish students and their parents would trust the process. Life has many progressions, and academics is a big part of that. I feel like after I retire with my job from the state, I'll still be coaching ball. In my 25 years of coaching, I've noticed the black community used to be more supportive, wanting to help out. It takes a village to raise a kid, and I don't see that closeness anymore. You know, us wanting to help one another out, like we used to, supporting one another, caring about the next man, lifting them up instead of always looking out for oneself, has changed.
Your community is your family. When I was a teenager, people would go and see Miss Denise, the manager at Terrell Brandon's shop, and to this day, people are still able to go and socialize and have some camaraderie there. I really believe that business does a lot for the community. They hold food drives, coat drives, and has really been a staple for blacks, and especially black men, to go in and talk about whatever struggles they may have. Honestly, that shop couldn't have come at a better time in my life. I was 9 years old when I found out my mom was smoking crack. From there, things quickly spiraled out of control. I would go to spend the night with someone and be there for a year. My siblings and I went from house to house, living with different relatives, sometimes together and other times apart. Some of our relatives didn't want to be bothered with us. They thought we'd turn out like our mother, be pregnant or on drugs. I constantly switched schools. I just wanted to be in a place where there was food, running water, lights, stability. I moved in with my aunt on Alberta when I was 16, 17. She lived down the street from Jefferson High School. The area was full of gangs, a lot of dilapidated buildings, and a community of mostly African Americans. I was terrified to live there with my aunt, but was grateful for the structure. I caught the city bus to Marshall because I was afraid to attend Jefferson, but there were gang members at my school. I became friends with one of them. He protected me. He was so smart. We talked about what we wanted to be when we grew up. I asked him why he was a gang member. His whole family was involved in gangs. My mother married the father of this kid who used to get on the number 72, say stuff, throw up gang signs, and run off the bus. I was surrounded by gang and gun violence. One day at school, there was a shooting. A boy was going around bullying people. I told him he should stop before something bad happened to him, but he didn't listen. Next thing I know, this kid, who was super smart, nice, and quiet, brought a gun to school and shot 3 people right in front of me and some friends while we were eating breakfast in the cafeteria. I was in shock at first, but one of my friends instructed us to gather towels and apply pressure to the victim, and they all survived. A week later, one of the victim's mother came to a game and thanked me for helping her son. I didn't know how she knew me, but turns out she was in prison with my mother. As I turned to people in the community for support during those times, I had no idea my mother was using drugs as a means to treat her own trauma. My mother's mother was a raging alcoholic, and when my mother was a child, she had to pick my grandmother up from downtown because cabs refused. During her high school years, a friend talked her into trying a pill she had bought from the area drug dealers so she could relax and study. Instead, she passed out, woke up to a man raping her, and then, to make a horrific situation worse, found out she was pregnant. She tried to hide it until it was too late to get an abortion. And when she went into labor and was taken to OHSU, it became more of a nightmare. She didn't have anyone there to support her. She was surrounded by white nurses who talked about her when they went into the hallway, saying things like, well, she's a single mom and she probably doesn't even know who the dad is. My mother started bleeding really bad and had to get 98 stitches. That medical team just let her rip, and she had no choice but to stay there and take it. She began self-medicating to deal with her trauma. When Mom had her mental breakdown, they treated her worse than when she had the drug habit. But that didn't stop her from seeking therapy for us and her. more than 20 years ago, my mom graduated from Project Network, a treatment program that provides wraparound services for women and children. Well, now she does the same for others. Her presence is regal like. When she steps into the NA room, they call her queen. She has a really enormous heart and a passion for advocacy around domestic violence, mental health, and addiction. She is brilliant, in my opinion. My mother always says people don't just wake up and say, oh, I'm going to be a drug addict, I'm going to be an alcoholic, or I'm going to be a prostitute. There's a story or something that happened in their life to get them to that point. You know, people always tell me how strong I am, and I am. But early on, I was depressed. I tried to commit suicide. I was embarrassed and didn't trust going into a facility run by white people who would turn my pain against me and those I love, or to black people who would judge me like they did my mother. But I know I am not alone. This is not an Angela issue. There are people like me who experience trauma all the time and rise above it because your community is your family.